Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Ricciardi. I'm the president and CEO of Cognition Therapeutics. I want to thank you for joining us today in the third of our podcast series, Cognition Conversations. With great pleasure, I will tell you we have the privilege today of speaking with two leading caregiver advocates for patients that have Lewy Body dementia. Mary Lou Falcone is the founder of ML Falcone, a public relations firm that is one of the most highly regarded behind-the-scenes figures in the classical music industry. She is also a passionate activist for Lewy Body dementia based on her personal experience as a caregiver. In addition, today we're joined by Norma Loeb, who's the founder and executive director of the Lewy Body Resource Center. I'd like to begin by asking each of you briefly to describe how it is you came to be here in this role as an advocate for patients and caregivers with Lewy Body dementia. Norma, may I start with you?
Surely, Lisa, thank you. I started because my mom had Lewy Body dementia and she showed signs of it at age 75, which at this point is almost 25 years ago. So I've been dealing with this disease since then with her, and she lived with me for the last 8 years of her life, and she was bedridden. And so I really know the disease from beginning to end.
I came to Lewy Body dementia through my late husband, Nicky Zan. I began noticing in 2017 that things were just not right. By 2019, we were among the lucky people. One isn't lucky to have the disease, but lucky in that we found a neurologist through our primary care physician who was brilliant at diagnosis. That is not usual, that's not normal. Most people have to struggle to even get the diagnosis. And then the journey with Lewy Body started. In 2019 was the diagnosis, and by July of 2020, Nicky had passed.
If we could, I'd like to start there. Early signs, symptoms, behaviors. What are the things that raised a flag for each of you that something wasn't quite right?
For me, it was noticing that behavior patterns were just a little bit off. That's how it started. And I thought, well, it might be this, it might be that. And then triple bypass surgery happened. Nicky needed a triple bypass. And I thought, well, that's it. That's going to cure it. But it didn't. Things got worse. Things got more complicated. The behavior patterns, the cognitive issues were what showed first. What I didn't know is that Nicky had auditory hallucinations from the surgery in 2017, but by 2019 he was hearing voices coming out of the faucet, voices coming out of the pillow. It was really the beginning of what was a downward slope. However, it's very elusive because someone with Lewy Body goes in and out. It's cognitive fluctuation. And that's what makes it so different, for instance, from Alzheimer's, that one day you're completely out of it and the next day you're 100% yourself, making it very confusing for everybody.
You must have doubted yourself along the way, Mary Lou, thinking, gosh, yesterday Nicky was in terrible shape, and yet here he is today, perfectly coherent, etc., right?
I did, but only for a second, because I just knew in my heart something was dramatically wrong, and I was determined to find out what it was.
Norma, how about yourself? Signs, symptoms, behaviors?
The first sign was actually my mother herself telling me that she could not do her checkbook, and she was great with numbers and she was having an issue with it. Other than that, she also mentioned, but we didn't know there was any correlation, she would say, get up from a chair or a car, and she said, pointing to her hip, it's as if the motor isn't working. Just she couldn't stand up in the same way. Those were the early signs. And when she went to her internist at the time, and we talked about the problem with the checkbook, and she was 75, he said, it's a normal part of aging. So I just want to be sure everybody knows that that's not a normal part of aging. And so from there, we went from doctor to doctor to a geriatrician who misdiagnosed her with Alzheimer's. It took 3.5 years to get the right diagnosis, which is why I do what I do, because I don't want anyone to have to go through the same thing. It's very common to be misdiagnosed with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, or unfortunately a psychiatric disorder.
We often get asked, sometimes by PIs, often by investors, patients, people interested in this area, what are some of the other symptoms? So oftentimes physician will say, well, very, very disturbed sleep, people acting out their dreams.
With Nicky, it was that he would try to compensate for whatever was happening. For instance, his right leg was dragging a little bit, or his hand was shaking a little bit, and I was noticing that. Then I'd say something, and he'd go, "Oh, yes, of course, I'm not walking, comfortably or properly," and he'd correct it until it then happened again. The other thing about the checkbook, I did notice that it was taking him 1/2 hour to write one check.
Wow.
And the handwriting was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. These are minute little details, but they are telltale signs. And then, of course, the forgetfulness begins, and you see all of these things. But they come back. He comes back. He's 100% Nicky, and that's when you know that he knows also what's happening. And that's when your heart just breaks.
We talked about fluctuations. Hallucinations are a big part of this as well. And it's very common for people to have hallucinations of animals and small children. And they're not frightened by that. But there's so many other aspects, as you're saying, about the REM sleep disorder, which my mom also didn't have, but she had restless leg syndrome, which is also a precursor for many.
Which when you look back, you go, wow, all the signs were there, but you don't know that in the moment. That's what I think,
No,
right?
no, in the
Yeah.
moment, you're going to find any other thing that it might be.
The hallucination, I think, is a very important point from what we hear at Cognition. It's rarely mentioned, and my own thesis is for patients, it must be terrifying, and that's why they don't talk about it.
Lisa, I'd like to mention about the hallucinations that they're the same way that you said a lot of people don't speak about them. There are many people who do. And it's really important to say that if you've met one person with Lewy body, you've met one, because they all progress differently. Symptoms can come and go, as Mary Lou mentioned. Some people see really frightening hallucinations, which is why then they need medications, which is also a hugely important topic, because though there's no cure for Alzheimer's or Lewy body or Parkinson's disease, it's really important for people to be diagnosed correctly, because people with Lewy body are extremely sensitive to medications, and the wrong ones, particularly older antipsychotics, can be fatal.
Also, you just mentioned Parkinson's in this mix, and Lewy body dementia very often has a Parkinsonian aspect to it. When Nikki was diagnosed, the diagnosis was Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonian aspects. I thought he had Parkinson's. That's because I saw the hand tremors and I saw the leg dragging, the right leg dragging. And sure enough, he did, but that wasn't all that he had.
We hear that frequently, that the falling is often one of the first things that the caregivers or the families will notice. In fact, when you look at the data, it says in aggregate, DLB patients take more total costs in dollars over a lifespan than Alzheimer's patients. Why? The falls ending up in the emergency room. And so often the first symptom is the gait disturbances. And to your point, Mary Lou, people ending up with a Parkinson's disease movement specialist, etc. What's valuable about the two of you coming forward is we can allow other people listening to get a feel for the palette of symptoms, if you will, and recognize there's probably a few things to clue into here. Now, Mary Lou, you said you hit it out of the ballpark. How fortunate were you? I suspect the experience that you had, Norma, 3.5 years to find a proper diagnosis, maybe more typical. It would be helpful to understand a little bit more about that, and then how your resource center can help families that are beginning to think this is part of what they need to deal with. or learn and understand?
Well, the early diagnosis was a blessing, no question about it. We had a primary care physician who actually knew what he was looking at and sent us to the right neurologist, an expert in Lewy body dementia, and that was just pure luck and skill, of course, on our primary care doctor's part. But when the diagnosis was made, and it was made basically on the cognitive tests that they did, in the office, the general tests that they give everybody, and then that was supported by a DAT scan and a REM sleep test. So those two tests supported the diagnosis, but the doctor had no problem saying that it was Lewy body dementia even before those two tests were done, which is interesting. At that point, I then, with a follow-up visit, asked, what can I expect? And there was radio silence. That is a frightening moment when the doctor won't open up, won't tell you anything about it. And that was my experience. And so a very dear friend told me about the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center. I mean, Norma was my lifeline. So I am indebted to the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center and to Norma Loeb for being there for all of us, for being there to help, to share, to open up, and to give you hope.
Thank you, Mary Lou. I want to say, because I had done so much to try to find out information to help my mom from the very beginning and going on, when I finally found out what was going on, from then, I've been leading the only support groups in New York for more than 14 years. So we offer support groups. We have the only live helpline in the US for Lewy body dementia, and a website with hundreds of pages, I have to say. And so, for instance, someone can find a medical alert card right on the homepage. It's talking about the medications, a lot of them, but not all of them, that a person with Lewy body should not be given. Crucial information. And when people call the helpline or come in the support groups or send emails, they don't know where to turn because they don't know how to deal with the hallucinations or with the fluctuations. They're finding it hard to understand from day to day what to do. And then there are things in conjunction with the hallucinations and delusions. There's something called Capgras syndrome. At least a quarter of caregivers experience that because the person with Lewy body may see them as an imposter. And it's so heart-wrenching because that usually happens to couples who have been together for more than 50 years. And now they're seeing them as the bad Mary instead of the good one. And what did you do with that one? So all of these instances of happening, they need somewhere to turn to, and they need that personal interaction because everyone's going through something different. So because it took me so long to get all the information, I wanted to share it and to bring awareness to as many people as possible. And that's why I founded the Lewy Body Resource Center.
Sounds invaluable.
It is totally invaluable.
Once you've determined there really is something going on, how do you best prepare for a physician's visit?
I think it's important to write things down. The problem with most of us is we think we're going to remember all of it, and we don't. And especially in the moment of truth, sitting before a doctor and you've got a limited amount of time, you come in armed with a list. So I began to keep a log of what was going on, just things that I noticed. Once the diagnosis was there, I then kept a very detailed log, a monthly log, so that all doctors could participate in the same information. And I found that to be incredibly helpful, and so did they.
First of all, I'd like to stress for those who don't know that it's actually neurologists who best diagnose this disease. Most GPs will have heard of it. It's just really frustrating in a doctor's office, but at the same time, all the symptoms that show up with fluctuations, REM sleep disorder, visual spatial problems, you cannot see them in an office visit, which is why it's so important to have all information written down. I can tell you that on the helpline and support groups, 100% of the time, people will say, I realize that there were symptoms years ago that we overlooked, that we didn't notice because you're not putting everything together. So as much as you can do that, to do that. And please know, also, I want everyone to know that if you leave the office and the diagnosis does not seem right, because there will be misdiagnosis of Alzheimer's, there'll be misdiagnosis of Parkinson's. They might just say early onset dementia. If you see other things going on, do not dismiss them. So I just want to emphasize, if you feel that you're not getting the right answer, don't give up.
Mary Lou, over to you. One of the things you and I have had an opportunity to talk about is when you're the caregiver, how do you deal with that yourself, the frustration, the concern, the up and down?
First of all, the caregiver needs to take care of himself or herself. It's vital, because if something happens to you as the caregiver, who is going to take over? So very often a caregiver will say, well, it's very selfish. I can't be selfish. It is not selfish. It's self-preservation, and it's preserving for the person as well. So that's primary. Secondly, the Lewy body patient, the Lewy body person, has such instinct about feelings. They know what you're feeling. They pick up on your vibrations. They may not be verbal about it. They may not be demonstrative, but they feel deeply. So you, as the caregiver, have a responsibility to let your anger, and there is anger, and your impatience, and there is impatience, to let it out, not in front of the person, but rather find a private, safe, quiet place and scream into a pillow or do something to release that tension and that anger, because it's real and you need to do it. And then the caregiver needs to forgive himself or herself for feeling angry and impatient, because forgiveness is very much a part of this, forgiving yourself. And lastly, I think there is a mantra that I lived by with Nikki and that I really share with others, which is to tell the person that you love that they are loved, they are protected, and they are safe. Those three things are so important: love, protection, safety. And with a calmness, as calm as you can. It sounds so simple, and it is so hard.
I was going to say, about all these things you've said, Mary Lou, the words are easy, but what a lifetime of experience to come to the point where you're at and to share that advice. That's extremely helpful. If I'm not mistaken, you also have a publication coming out that will allow others dealing with this to learn more fully from your experience.
I do. I have a book that is being published in October of 23 of this year called I Didn't See It Coming: Scenes of Love, Loss, and Lewy Body Dementia.
Wow.
So that will be coming out in the fall. You know, it's not all despair. There are beautiful moments, and to take those beautiful moments and remember them, always trying to keep the dignity of your loved one intact.
I guess I have a question for each of you. If there are other things that you would like to add to this discussion, assuming that many of the people listening, we hope, are caregivers and perhaps even patients.
Right now, and lots of things are happening, and I have great hope for the future in terms of finding something to slow down Lewy body dementia or something to cure it. That's my optimistic side. But realistically speaking, today we don't have that. So I would say you have to enjoy and embrace the moments that you have, so that at the end of the journey, and there will be an end, that you, the caregiver, can look at the journey and say, I did what I needed to do. I did everything I could.
Thank you.
And Lisa,
Norma?
what I would add, the same way that Mary Lulu was talking earlier about safety, it's really important for those who may not realize it. The person with Lewy body, and probably anybody with dementia, particularly with Lewy body, because they're well aware of things, and actually they may know what they want to say, but they can't get the words out for quite some time. So when something is happening, they need to feel safe And so that to know that you're taking care of the situation and they don't have to think of a solution and they know that you're there for them, it's hugely important for them to feel safe and also to feel in control at the same time.
Well, I have to say, you are two remarkable and courageous women. What you've been through, I mean, I'm very much in awe of it and moved by the things you've experienced. And I'm thankful that you're both willing to talk so that others may benefit from the hard road you've been on. And I will say thank you. You've created this resource center. You have a book coming out educating others. It seems very clear that your pain did not go into some distant memory, that in fact you created some very positive things to help other people. From our side at Cognition, we're clearly hoping we find a way to help patients through treatment, and that's a goal we continue to work on by recruiting patients to our trials. We applaud you. And my thanks again to both of you with great appreciation for joining us today. Thank you both.
And we thank you,
Thank you,
for all
Lisa.
that you're doing.
Thank you very much.